The daughter cried when she asked. The mother smiled when she moved. The mistress settled in like she had always belonged there. The husband exhaled like a problem was solved. None of them, not one, looked up at the bronze dedication plaque above the stage. Her name was on it. Her name was Ada's. But everybody who loved her called her Ada, and there weren't many of those left anymore. Not in the house she still lived in, not in the marriage she was still, technically, inside of. She was 41 years old, and she still moved through the world the way her father had taught her, quietly, carefully, like someone who understood that the ground beneath you was borrowed, and you had better not waste a single step. She was the kind of woman you noticed after she left the room, the kind of woman whose presence you only really understood once it was gone. Her face was smooth brown skin, high cheekbones, eyes that had seen enough to stay permanently calm. She didn't carry her pain on the outside. She packed it down deep and kept moving. That was both her gift and her burden, and over the years, the people in her life had mistaken that ability for weakness so many times that they had stopped questioning it. Her husband's name was Kofi. He was 43 and still convinced that the most important thing about a man was how he looked walking into a room. He wore tailored suits on weekdays and pressed shirts on weekends. He kept his fade tight. He kept his smile ready. He was the kind of man who shook hands with strangers like they owed him something. Charming the way certain men are charming, effortlessly, and without any real warmth underneath it. The kind of charming that works beautifully at parties and falls apart completely in the private hours when a marriage needs more than a smile. They had been married 18 years, long enough for Ada to know every version of him, long enough for her to have loved the best version deeply and grieved the loss of it quietly and eventually stopped looking for its return. Their daughter was Imani, 18 years old, smart in the way that only children raised in complicated houses are smart. She could read a room before she crossed the threshold. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jawline, and she carried both parents inside her in ways that sometimes felt like a contradiction she couldn't resolve. She loved her mother with the full weight of her heart, the uncomplicated, fierce love of a daughter who had watched her mother absorb cruelty without breaking and understood at some bone-deep level that this woman was made of something rare. She feared her father in the quiet, complicated way that daughters fear men who make them feel like a burden when they most need to feel like a daughter. And she had learned, over the years, to keep both of those things separate and hidden, the way children in difficult houses always learn to hide the things that hurt them most. This is the story of what happened the morning of Imani's graduation. But to understand that morning, you have to understand the year that came before it. The trouble hadn't started with Remy. That's what Kofi had told himself. That Remy was a consequence of an already broken marriage, not the cause of one. That was a comfortable story, and he told it to himself often. But the truth was simpler and less flattering. The marriage had broken in the slow, invisible way that marriages break when one person stops being curious about the other, when the questions stop, when you stop wondering what your partner is thinking, what she is building, what she is carrying, and start just moving through the shared space like she is furniture, something present and useful but not really requiring attention. Kofi had stopped being curious about Ada somewhere around year 10. He told himself she was simple, steady, and simple. She handled the house, managed the finances, their household finances, he thought, raised Imani and worked on her small consulting business on the side. He had asked about the consulting work exactly 4 times in 15 years. She had answered every time in her quiet, careful way, and he had nodded and redirected the conversation back to himself, back to his development projects, back to the deals he was chasing. He never noticed that her answers had grown larger each year. He never noticed because he stopped listening after the first sentence. Remy came into the picture 2.5 years ago. She worked in a building 2 blocks from Kofi's office. She laughed at everything he said. She asked about his deals with a brightness in her eyes that felt, to a man who had been operating in a house of quiet dignity for years, like sunlight after a long winter. He knew it was wrong. He did it anyway. He is not the first man to make that choice, and he will not be the last, but that does not make the choice any less devastating to the people left holding the damage. Ada knew within 3 months. She had always been observant. It was the same quality that made her excellent at what she did professionally. The ability to read a room, trace a pattern, understand where something was moving before it arrived. She saw the change in Kofi the way you notice a shift in the weather. She sat with that knowledge for 2 weeks before she did anything with it. And then she decided, in the particular silent way that Ada decided everything, that she was not going to perform the role of the wronged wife. She was not going to beg. She was not going to fight. She was going to protect her daughter, maintain her dignity, and keep building what she had been building. She was going to let the situation reveal itself in its own time, and she was going to be ready when it did. What she did not anticipate, what even Ada, with all her patience and all her planning, had not fully prepared for, was how far Kofi's family would lean into it. Celestine, his mother, had never fully accepted Ada. From the beginning, from the first Sunday dinner Ada attended 20 years ago, there had been a coolness between them. Not hostility exactly, just the particular way certain older women withhold warmth from daughters-in-law they have decided, for reasons they never fully articulate, are not quite right for their sons. When Celestine found out about Remy, and Kofi told her, which was its own kind of betrayal, going to his mother before even trying to have an honest conversation with his wife, she embraced the situation with something that looked too much like relief. She began inviting Remy to Sunday dinners, to family birthdays, to the small gatherings that had always been Ada's territory. She introduced Remy to her church friends. She made space for her, with a warmth she had never fully extended to the woman who had given her a granddaughter. And the cruelty, as these cruelties always do, came not in one dramatic blow, but in 100 small ones. A chair not saved at the table, a conversation that paused when Ada entered the room and resumed when she left. A family photo taken at Easter with Remy present and Ada standing just outside the frame. An invitation to a cousin's birthday party that arrived addressed to Kofi and daughter, but not to wife. Small things, the kind of things you cannot take to a lawyer or announce at a gathering, the kind of things that have no individual weight but accumulate over months into something crushing. Ada absorbed every one of them. She absorbed them the way her father had taught her to absorb hard things, not by ignoring them, but by choosing carefully which ones to carry forward and which ones to let fall away. She was not numb. She felt every cut. But she had made a decision about her energy, and she was keeping it. She confronted Kofi once. It was a Tuesday evening in October, 14 months before graduation. Imani was at a friend's house. The two of them were alone in the kitchen for the first time in weeks. Ada poured herself a glass of water. She turned around. She looked at her husband. She said, in her plain and direct way, "Kofi, I know about Remy. I know how long it's been. I'm asking you once to tell me what you want to do about this marriage." Kofi looked at her for a long time, and then he said something that Ada would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was so completely, accidentally honest. He said, "Ada, the truth is, I don't think you even need this marriage. You've got your little business, and you've got Imani. I don't think you need anything from me." Ada opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she opened the cabinet under the counter, took out a notebook, not her father's leather one, just a regular spiral notebook she kept for household lists, and she wrote something on the first blank page. She closed it. She walked out of the kitchen. She went into the guest room. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and held her father's leather notebook with both hands, and she breathed until the feeling that was moving through her, grief and fury and something that felt almost like a terrible relief, settled enough for her to think clearly. She did not cry, not that night. She had learned long ago that crying in the middle of a situation only costs you clarity you cannot afford to spend. She opened the leather notebook. She read her father's handwriting on the first page. She turned to a section near the back, a set of calculations, projections, figures she had been tracking for 4 years. She read them over. She closed the book. She lay down on the guest room bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She was done trying to save the marriage. She was not done. She was not broken. She was done. And there is a difference that most people never understand between being done and being defeated. Being defeated means you stop moving. Being done means you stop wasting motion in the wrong direction and redirect every ounce of energy toward where you are actually going. Ada redirected. She moved the rest of her personal files into a separate, secure cloud account that week. She retained a family attorney the following month, quietly, through a referral that Kofi would never be able to trace. She met with her firm's board, and yes, she had a board. She had had one for 6 years, and Kofi did not know this because he had never asked. And she began the process of organizing what needed to be organized. She did all of this without drama, without announcement, without a single change in her daily behavior that Kofi could have noticed because Kofi was not looking, and she kept building. 3 months before graduation, in the middle of everything, her firm completed an acquisition that pushed its valuation past $32 billion. She found out at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Sitting in her car in the driveway of the house she and Kofi still technically shared, because she had been on a call she could not take inside. She sat in that car for 11 minutes after the call ended. She let herself feel it, the enormity of what 15 years of early mornings and late nights and patient, relentless work had become. She cried for 6 of those 11 minutes. Then she wiped her face, got out of the car, went inside, made sure Imani had finished her homework, made sure the house was in order, went to her room, set her father's notebook on the nightstand, turned out the light, said nothing. The morning of graduation arrived like it always does in the South, with thick, warm air and bright, hard sun, and the smell of somebody's breakfast drifting out through a screen door. Ada was up before 6. She ironed her cream dress the night before, but she checked it again anyway, the way her father used to check everything twice, because he said the second check is where you catch what confidence missed. She laid it across the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the leather notebook in both hands. She didn't open it, she just held it, the way you hold something that has always held you up. She set it in her purse carefully. Then she got up and began getting dressed. She was not sad that morning. She had moved past sad a long time ago. What she felt, if she had to name it, was something closer to patience arriving at its final moment, the way a breath feels right before you release it. By the time she was dressed, Kofi was already gone. He had stayed at his own place, his word for it, 3 nights that week. She heard him come in late and leave early, and she had long since stopped marking his comings and goings in any part of herself that it used to touch. She drove to the school alone. She liked being early. She found a seat in the center section, 3rd row, and she set her flowers, white lilies, Imani's favorite, on the seat beside her. She had bought 2 tickets, one for herself and one for Kofi. She was still doing things like that. buying the second ticket, saving the aisle seat so he could slide in easy. She knew it was probably pointless. She did it anyway. That is the particular persistence of a woman who honors her own integrity, even when the person she is honoring it for has stopped deserving it. She sat straight. She folded her hands. She looked at the empty stage and let herself feel the clean, uncomplicated thing. A mother's pride. Imani had worked hard for this moment, harder than her father ever saw, because he was rarely present enough to notice. But Ada had seen every late night, every reread chapter, every moment her daughter chose discipline over rest. That was something no one could touch. The auditorium filled around her, other families, other mothers in bright dresses, fathers in church clothes, grandparents photographing everything. The sound of joy shared between people who had stayed by each other. Ada watched it all with that calm that people sometimes mistook for detachment and was actually the opposite, the calm of someone present in every cell. And then Kofi walked in. He was not alone. He came through the side entrance with Remy on his arm. She had on a red dress and heels that were too high for the occasion, and the look of a woman who had confused being invited somewhere with belonging there. His mother, Celestine, moved beside him, working the room with nods and greetings, comfortable in the performance of family. They moved like a unit. They had been practicing this particular performance for months. Ada watched them from the third row. She kept her face the way she kept everything. Steady, composed, betraying nothing. Kofi spotted her. They held eyes for exactly 1 second, long enough for understanding to pass between them, not regret, just the acknowledgement of two people who know exactly where they stand. He looked away first. He leaned down to Imani, who was standing near the entrance in her graduation gown, waiting to line up with her class. Ada watched her daughter's face change. The light went out of it in real time. Her hands came together in front of her the way they always did when she was holding something back. Imani walked toward her mother. Ada read every step of it. By the time her daughter was standing in front of her, with tears already forming at the corners of her eyes, Ada already knew what she was going to say. "Mama," Imani whispered, "Daddy said he wants Remy to—" "I heard, baby," Ada said softly. "You didn't hear. I haven't even—" "I know," Ada said, and she reached up and touched Imani's face with 2 fingers, gentle and sure and certain. The touch of a woman who has decided that the most important thing happening in this moment is not her own pain but her daughter's. "It's okay. I'll sit in the back." "Mama, no, you don't have to do that. That's your seat. You bought—" "Imani." Her voice was soft, but it was also a wall, warm and immovable. "Look at me." She waited until Imani raised her eyes. "This is your day. You worked 4 years for this morning. You walk across that stage and you hold your head up and you dare let what's happening right now make you feel small. You hear me? Not one drop of what your father does today touches what you've earned. Not one drop." Imani nodded. The tear broke loose anyway. Ada caught it with her thumb the way she had been catching that child's tears since she was 2 days old. "Go get in line," Ada said. "I'll see you from the back. I'll see everything just fine." She picked up her lilies. She stood. She smoothed her cream dress with both hands, slow and deliberate. She looked at Kofi once across the room. Not in anger, not in pain, not in appeal. Just in the long, clear, final way that a woman looks at something she is done carrying. Then she turned and walked to the very last row of the auditorium. She sat down alone. She crossed her ankles. She set the flowers in her lap with the careful hands of a woman who knows that some things are worth keeping beautiful, even when the room around you is not. Nobody looked at her twice. Remy settled into Ada's seat like she was unwrapping something she had earned. She crossed her legs, adjusted her earrings, looked around the room with the bright, proprietary satisfaction of someone who believes they have arrived. Celestine sat beside her and patted her arm with the warmth she had never once extended to Ada in 18 years of marriage. Kofi sat on the other side and exhaled, that long, slow release of a man who believes he has just handled a difficult situation neatly. None of them looked up at the bronze plaque mounted above the stage. Ada opened her program, white and gold, the school crest, the order of ceremony, faculty names, honors students, the names of the graduates, and on the very last page, in a simple box near the bottom under the heading Major Benefactors of the Class of 2024, one name sat in quiet gold print. She looked at it. She ran one finger across it, the same careful, private tenderness she used with the notebook. She closed the program, set it in her lap, looked up at the stage. She was ready. The ceremony started on time. The school choir sang first. 3 songs, slow and full-bodied, the kind of music that is rooted so deep in Black tradition, it feels less like performance and more like memory. People closed their eyes. The sound moved through the room and touched something old and real in the people who led it. Then the vice principal gave a short welcome. Programs flapped in the warm air. Cell phones came up. The particular choreography of a graduation morning, restless and proud and tender all at once, filled every corner of that auditorium. Imani was near the front of the graduating class line, arranged alphabetically, which put her close to the beginning. Ada couldn't see her from the back row, but she knew exactly how her daughter was standing, chin up, hands together, eyes forward, doing what she had been shown. Before the diplomas were presented, Principal Okafor stepped to the podium. He was a tall man, 52 years old, close-cut gray at his temples, the deliberate bearing of someone who understood that every word he said in that room would settle somewhere in someone and stay. He adjusted the microphone. He took a moment and looked out over the full auditorium. Every parent, every student, every teacher, every family dressed in their best on a warm June morning. He let the room go completely still before he opened his mouth. "Before we begin the presentation of diplomas," he said, "I have a special announcement, and I want every person in this room to give me their full attention, because what I'm about to share deserves it." Programs went down, phones dropped to laps. Even the children in the balcony section stopped fidgeting. There was something in his voice, a gravity, a preparation, that told the room this was not a routine announcement. "The building you are sitting in right now," he said, "was not funded by a government grant. It was not funded by a corporate donation. It was not the result of a years-long committee fundraising effort. This building, the Performing Arts Center that your children have rehearsed in, performed in, grown in, was made possible by a single private individual who wrote a single check, $32 million, 2 years ago, and who asked, at the time of signing, to remain anonymous until this specific graduation ceremony." The murmur that moved through the crowd was low and wide, the particular sound of a room recalibrating. "What most of you do not know," Principal Okafor continued, his voice measured and careful, "is that this same individual is the founder and sole owner of a private equity and development company that, as of earlier this year, is valued at $32 billion. He paused for exactly the right amount of time. "That is billion, with a B, built over 15 years, without fanfare, without press, without any announcement at all, because that is precisely the kind of woman she is." He looked down at his notes one final time. He did not need them. He looked back up. And when his eyes moved to find her, they found her without hesitation, the way eyes always find what they have been looking for, all the way at the very back of the auditorium, in the last row in a cream dress, sitting alone with a bouquet of lilies in her lap. "It is the greatest professional honor of my career," he said, and he meant it, to introduce the founder of the Ades Group and the sole benefactor of this building, which bears her father's name, Mrs. Ades. 2 seconds of pure, suspended silence, and then the room turned, not all at once. It moved in slow sections, like a field of tall grass, bending toward a sound it could feel before it fully heard. Row by row, head by head, the entire auditorium turned toward the back of the room. Parents who had never set eyes on her, teachers who had spoken her name casually in meetings without knowing the full weight of it, students who had walked through this building every day for 2 years on top of a floor she had paid for. All of them turning, all of them finding her at once. Where a woman in a cream dress was already standing, she did not rush. She rose the way water rises, slowly, completely, without drama. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands. She picked up her flowers, and she began to walk down the center aisle, from the very last row of the auditorium, all the way toward the stage. She did not look left or right. She did not acknowledge the applause that was beginning to build from somewhere in the middle section and spreading outward. She did not smile for the cameras going up around her or the heads turning as she passed. She just walked, straight and unhurried and entirely herself, the way a woman walks when she has been carrying herself toward this moment for 15 years, and finally, the moment has come to meet her. In the center section, Kofi's face did something that faces only do when the world rearranges itself beneath a man's feet without warning. The color did not drain out exactly. It shifted the way a building shifts when something in the foundation gives way. His jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, pressed flat. He blinked twice. He looked up, for the first time, perhaps the only time, truly looked up at the plaque mounted above the stage. Ades Winston Center for the Arts. He had driven past this building. He had walked through this building dozens of times, for school events, for parent meetings, for a fundraising dinner last spring where he had complimented the new space to another parent, and that parent had nodded and said nothing, because what do you say? He had never once read the name on the wall. He had looked at it and not seen it, because he had stopped seeing his wife years before he stopped looking at her. Remy turned the program over slowly in her hands. She turned to the last page. She found the gold box. She read the name. She read it again. She set the program face down in her lap, and she did not pick it up again. The bright certainty she had arrived with, the red dress, the gold earrings, the performance of belonging, dimmed visibly, the way a light dims when something trips the circuit. She looked at the woman moving down the aisle and understood, in the full and humbling way, that certain truths arrive exactly where she was sitting and what it meant. Celestine sat with her hands folded and her face very still. The expression she wore was the expression of a woman adding up a long column of numbers and arriving at a sum she did not anticipate. Every Sunday dinner she had hosted for Remy while Ada was quietly excluded. Every photograph, every small permitted cruelty, she was adding them up now against what she was watching, and the sum was not flattering. Ada reached the stage. Principal Okafor was waiting for her at the base of the steps. He extended his hand. She shook it, firm and direct, the handshake of a woman who has been in boardrooms. She turned to face the auditorium, hundreds of people, the sound of applause that had built fully now and filled every corner of that space. Teachers standing, parents who didn't know her, moved by something they felt but couldn't name. The particular electricity that moves through a room when real dignity reveals itself. Students leaning forward from the wings in their caps and gowns, craning their necks, trying to see. And in the center of it all, in the third row, in the seat that had been taken from her that morning, her husband and his mistress and his mother, sitting in a building with her name on the wall. Ada stood at the microphone. She did not rush into the silence. She used it. She had always known how to use silence better than most people knew how to use words. When she spoke, her voice was soft and completely steady. No performance in it, no victory lapping, just the quiet truth of a woman who has arrived somewhere she always knew she was going. "My father told me," she said, "that what you build in silence, no one can take in noise." She let that land. I just wanted my daughter to see that. She looked directly into the wings where the graduating class was seated, and through the crowd, across the distance and the noise and the years, she found Imani's face. And Imani, who had spent years watching her mother absorb cruelty without breaking, watching her give up seats and chairs and places at tables without complaint, watching her pour love into a house that did not pour it back, Imani stood up from her seat in the wings. She stood up slowly in her cap and gown, and the tears that came were not the tired and ashamed tears of a girl caught between two parents. These were different. These were the tears of someone watching something long overdue get spoken out loud, the tears of a daughter who finally understood that the silence she had watched her mother carry had never been surrender. Ada saw her daughter stand. She nodded once, one slow, certain nod. Then she stepped back from the microphone. She shook Principal Okafor's hand a second time. She descended the stage steps, and she walked, not to the front row, not to the seat that had been taken from her, not to claim anything in the room that people were watching her to claim, but back down the center aisle, back to the last row, back to the seat she had chosen that morning, because she had never needed the front. She had only ever needed her daughter to see what it looked like to choose a seat, not to be put in one. The applause followed her all the way to the back row. She sat down. She set her lilies in her lap. She looked at the stage. She was done performing. She was just a mother now, waiting to watch her daughter walk. The weeks after graduation moved the way consequences always move. Not like a storm, not all at once, not with the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. More like a tide going out, steady, inevitable, leaving things exposed that had always been there, just underwater. Kofi's business had been running on borrowed momentum for years, referrals that flowed through channels he never fully traced, contract opportunities that arrived through networks he had never consciously built. He had always told himself it was his reputation, his relationships, his ability in a room. And partially that was true. But a significant portion of what kept those doors open ran, invisibly, through Ada's world, through her firm's network, through relationships her people maintained with people who happened to also intersect with Kofi's world. Not manufactured, not calculated, just the natural consequence of proximity between two people who had built a life together. When the life separated, the proximity ended. The flow redirected, contracts didn't renew, introductions stopped materializing. Projects he expected to close stalled and then quietly died. His business didn't collapse like a building. It deflated like something that had been slowly losing air for a long time and finally had nothing left to hold its shape. Remy left the way people leave when they realize the investment no longer has the returns they projected. She didn't make a scene. She became unavailable, gradually at first, then completely. Kofi called her twice one Thursday evening. She answered once. The call lasted 4 minutes. Anger takes investment, and she had already moved hers somewhere else. Celestine called Ada 9 days after graduation. It was a Saturday morning. Ada was in the kitchen of the new house, the one she had purchased and renovated quietly over 2 years. 4 miles from where she and Kofi had lived. a house with wide windows and a front porch and a yard she was planning to grow things in. Celestine spoke carefully, in the tone older women use when they are attempting an apology without fully surrendering to one. She spoke about family, about misunderstanding, about good intentions that perhaps were not executed well. Ada listened for 30 seconds. When Celestine paused, Ada said, "Celestine, I don't need an apology from you. I just need you to know that I always loved your son more than he understood." Then she ended the call. She set the phone on the counter. She poured herself a cup of coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the yard, at the early green along the garden beds she had planted 2 weeks ago, and she felt the quiet that had been coming for a long time finally arrive and settle around her like something that had always been hers. Imani moved in 3 weeks after graduation, 3 boxes and a backpack and the complicated grief of a daughter, leaving the parent who was wrong but was still her parent. Ada helped her carry every box inside. She didn't make speeches. She didn't say, "I told you so," or "now you see." She just helped carry the boxes and made space on the shelves and asked if Imani wanted the bigger closet or the one near the window. That evening they ate dinner at the kitchen table in a house that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a home that belonged to the people inside it. Ada made her father's recipe, the one that smelled like the small house she had grown up in, the one that meant safety before she fully understood what safety was. Imani ate 2 helpings and asked for a third, and they both laughed at that in the uncomplicated way that laughter comes when people are finally, fully, at ease with each other. After dinner, Imani walked through the house slowly, room by room, running her hand along the walls the way you do when you are learning the shape of a place that might become home. She came back to the kitchen doorway and looked at her mother washing dishes and asked the question she had been carrying for 3 weeks. "Mama, how long have you been planning all of this?" Ada turned the water off, dried her hands, looked at her daughter, this girl she had loved since before the girl had a name, this person she had worked and built and stayed quiet and kept moving for. "Since before you were born, baby," she said. Imani nodded slowly. She came and stood beside her mother and leaned her head on Ada's shoulder the way she had when she was 7 years old, before the house became complicated, before she had to learn to love her parents in separate, careful portions. Ada put her arm around her. They stood there. The kitchen was warm and quiet. Outside the window, the yard was dark and the garden was there, growing in the dark the way things that are meant to grow always do, without needing anyone to watch. Kofi did not lose everything because Ada planned it that way. He lost it because he made a decision, not once, but 1,000 small times over 17 years, to stop being curious about the woman he married. He looked at Ada and decided she was simple. He looked at her work and decided it was minor. He looked at her silence and decided it was acceptance. He made those decisions and he held on to them, even when the evidence was all around him that they were wrong, because some people are more comfortable with their assumptions than they are with the truth. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes from underestimating someone. It is not always cruel in its intention. Kofi was not a monster. He was something more ordinary and in many ways more painful, a man who was not paying attention, who had a brilliant woman beside him for 18 years and never once thought to ask what she was building. That blindness is its own punishment. It is the punishment of waking up one morning in an empty apartment, trying to understand how your life reorganized itself while you were looking at something else, not understanding that the warning had been there the whole time. In the notebooks she carried, in the calls she took in the car, in the quiet she wore every day that he mistook for simplicity. Quiet people are not weak people. They are people who have made a specific and sophisticated decision about where their energy goes. She made it the first time Kofi talked over her at a dinner party and chose not to correct him. She made it the first time Celestine excluded her from a family conversation and chose to let it pass. She made it every morning she sat with that notebook and added to what she was growing while everyone around her was busy looking at what they assumed she was. She made it in the back row of that auditorium when she smoothed her dress and sat down alone. She was not being handled. She was waiting. And there is a difference between a woman who is broken and a woman who is patient that the world still has not fully learned to see. 6 months after graduation, on an early Saturday morning in spring, Ada sat on the front porch of her house with coffee and her father's notebook open in her lap. The air was soft. The garden along the left side of the yard was green and coming in slowly, and she did not rush it because she understood growing things. Imani was still asleep inside. The house was quiet the way a house is quiet when the people in it are at peace. Not the hollow quiet of absence, but the full quiet of rest. She turned to a page near the back of the notebook. She had written something there recently, not numbers this time, just a few lines in her own handwriting directly below her father's. Her father had written, "What you build in silence, no one can take in noise." Below it, in her own hand, she had written, "I built it, Daddy. I'm still building, and I taught her how." She read it once. She sat with it. She let herself feel the full thing, not just the triumph of the auditorium, not just the freedom of the house, but all of it together. The years of quiet, the years of building, the years of watching her daughter watch her and choosing, deliberately, to be worth watching. The grief of a marriage that should have been something different. The love, the real, substantial, costly love she had genuinely carried for a man who never understood the weight of what was in his hands. She felt all of it and let it move through her, and she didn't fight any of it. And then she let it settle. She closed the notebook. She set it on the porch railing. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the yard, at the green coming up slow along the beds, at the morning light touching it, at the patient, unhurried proof that things planted in the dark will always, in their own time, come to the surface. That is what real things do. They grow in silence first. They don't announce themselves. They don't perform. They don't ask for anyone's approval or attention or belief. They just keep growing, underground, in the dark, until one day they break through. And when they do, everybody who never thought to look down finally looks up. And there it is, built, real, rooted, and every bit of it was always hers. Stay with us. The best stories are still coming.